I'm not. Thank you very much. So welcome. My name is Janet Newsham, that don't know me, if you don't know me, and I'm the coordinator at Greater Manchester Hazards Centre and the chair of the UK Hazards Campaign. And we're a health and safety campaigning organisation and giving advice to workers on all things health and safety and welfare related. As I said before, please mute yourself if you're not speaking, and hopefully we'll have a chance afterwards to ask questions. In a minute, I'm going to introduce Dave to us all. We're going to have a bit of a chat really about his experiences and involvement in health and safety. And then I'll open it up to anybody to ask questions afterwards. So I'm really pleased to welcome Dave Smith. Dave is a blacklisted worker from the construction sector. He's a giant of the health and safety movement, a health and safety advocate, a champion, an educator, and a mentor. And if you're lucky enough to have been on one of his trade union courses, he inspires and motivates the best of people. He's not only talks the talk, he walks the walk in the same path as health and safety reps. He's had years of campaigning and practice in health and safety and shares his experiences freely. In his column in the wonderful Health and Safety Hazards magazine, he's been providing organisation actions and suggestions and introducing us with tools for health and safety reps. Anybody, I want to just say that he's up for, he's been nominated for the SHP Influential Person, and we'd hope that you'd support it and get people, as many people as you can, to vote before tomorrow. And I'll put the links in the chat. And without further ado, perhaps I could over to you, Dave, and perhaps you could just tell us a bit more about how you got involved in health and safety and what your activity has been around health and safety, how you got involved in it all.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Janet, and thank you for Hazards for the invite. Hello to everyone. I know some of the people in the room already. I've taught some of the people in the room in the past. And I've met others of you at Hazards Conference or at various protests and picket lines that we've done over the years. So, yeah, for those who don't necessarily know me, as Janet said, my background was the building game. So when I left school, I went and worked with my dad on building sites, and then afterwards went off to college and did some training and worked on various different things in the building sites in the 80s and 90s we're talking about now. And my first entry really to health and safety was working on building sites, just because it was everywhere. It wasn't one of these things that, you know, you only got taught on the first day of work and induction. It was just all around you. And I remember the first time I got involved with a construction safety campaign, which was a big campaign at the time in London. It was launched the same year as the Piper Alpha disaster in the North Sea. If people remember, 187 workers lost their lives in the North Sea when that rig went up in flames. And that same year, more than that many construction workers had died on a building site. It was when I first started working on a building site, it was more than 3 workers a week were dying on a construction site somewhere in Britain, and the employers weren't doing anything about it. You know, it was construction workers who ended up holding vigils for the people on building sites. It's the construction workers who, you know, organised sort of benefit things in the local social clubs in order to raise money for relatives. It was the construction workers who turned up at outside coroners' offices, coroners' courts and stuff like that, to sort of help the bereaved families. And yeah, so the construction safety campaign was really my first sort of toe in the water to doing trade union work and to doing campaigning on health and safety. And yeah, Tony O'Brien, who some of you will know, was sort of, Mick Holder, who some of you know, Pete Farrell. These people were, I just sort of looked up to these people as the ones who were organising all this stuff, under terrible sort of abuse from the employers. Sometimes I remember we tried to lay a reef. And we got lots of workers off a building site where the worker had died to come outside while we were laying this reef. And the employer deliberately drove sort of dumper trucks through the middle of where we were all assembling. I mean, it was just the lack of humanity as much as anything else that sort of used to wind people up. And very quickly I became my union at the time was UCAT, the Construction Workers Union. Very quickly I became a safety rep. In fact, construction is sort of unusual, I think, compared to other sectors where the unions are much more likely to elect safety reps than they are to elect shop stewards. The union's tends to have more safety reps than it has stewards, just because other than pay, pretty much everything else that a construction worker moans about is health and safety in one shape or another. It's the lack of PPE. It's the I mean, the amount of times I've had a dispute about the state of the toilets, or the lack of actually any canteen or anywhere to dry your clothes is sort of I've lost count of them kind of arguments we've had, but also more serious stuff like asbestos. I was working on a job with Costains once. It was a Tesco's job. And we were knocking down part of an existing Tesco's and building an extension on the part of it. And within the first couple of days I was there, the demolition people came up to me and said, "Dave, we found this stuff. We think it's asbestos." So I was the union safety rep. So I went and sort of had a look at it. Went to the site manager and said, "Look, I think this is asbestos. We need to do something about it. We need to stop the job." Even the demolition people who are used to doing this kind of stuff think it's asbestos, and they sacked me the next day. And we had a dispute. It's quite well known at the time. We were in the papers, and I won my initial employment tribunal because effectively, the evidence was damning against the company. But I eventually lost it. And the reason that I lost it wasn't because the employer admitted sacking me, and they admitted sacking me immediately after I'd complained about health and safety. But they won the employment tribunal because I didn't work directly on the cards for Costains. Because everyone in the building industry is very casualised, it's all subcontractors and agencies. And because I was employed by an agency, I'm effectively not covered by the law. And so one of the lessons that taught me very early on is relying on the law alone isn't going to get us, what we want for health and safety. I mean, it's useful when the law is on our side, and it's useful when we can quote the law to employers. But it was one of them things that I learned very quickly that our strength comes from, our co-workers sticking together. I got more support from from my fellow workers defending me, but sitting in a canteen to help me out for stuff than I ever got from the British legal system. And then because of being a safety rep, I was sent on TUC training courses to learn how to be a safety rep. A lot of us in this room will have done the same thing. And it was there that I first got involved with Hazards magazine. My tutor, Graham Peterson, some of you will know him from South Thames College at the time. He was my first ever tutor, and I think on the very first day of the very first training course I did, he got Hazards magazine out and made sure every single one of us sort of bought a copy, and took stuff back to our union branch and encouraged our union branches to affiliate to Hazards. So I've that's really our first came across health and safety. Yeah.
So you talk about not just relying on the law, and the importance of some of the campaigns, campaigning that you've been involved in, and that solidarity action by other trade unions. You must have seen some changes over the years. But what are good campaigns have you been involved with? What's the most important campaigns that you've been involved with, Dave?
Well, lots, to be honest. So, when I was still running around on building sites, some of you will remember the Simon Jones campaign. Do people remember Simon Jones? So he was a student, and for a summer holiday job, he got a job working on Shoreham Docks down near Brighton. And on the very first morning he was there, sorry about saying this, forgive me if this is a trigger for anyone, but he was decapitated by a grab machine, and it was his friends. Why the campaign was so great is it was his friends, it was his students, it was all these young people who were just outraged, not just about the fact that one of their friends had died, but the fact that, once again, because he was a casualised worker and he'd never been given any training or anything like that, and their tagline was "Casualisation kills," and their stickers were everywhere. I remember getting them along to meetings, and they were just so vibrant. It wasn't just, let's do a protest and give out a leaflet. They would occupy, head offices of the companies. They would occupy the health and safety executive. They'd blockade roads. And I was really inspired by the fact that, you could do something that's really, really serious, really sort of important about health and safety, but you could still be sort of in your face and, use good old-fashioned, civil disobedience as well. So the Simon Jones campaign I loved. I mean, lots of individual sort of campaigns. I was in a group in the 1990s called the Joint Sites Committee in London, because trade union branches in construction tend to be, in London we might have 20 trade union branches, but only like half a dozen people turn up to each one. So there was this sort of unofficial rank and file body called the Joint Sites Committee that just used to invite everyone to a pub once a month. And so from that we started started off with meetings of 10 or 20 of us, but then we ended up having meetings of hundreds, 200s of us, and we produced a little magazine called Builders Crack, which I'm excessively particularly love. I think it was one of the best things I've ever done. And we used to have a print run of that of between 5,000 and 10,000 copies. Which we used to get rid of on London building sites. And literally people used to just ring us up when they saw the magazine. We've got this problem on our site, can you come down and help us? And because in the building industry you're always in and out of work all the time, if any of us were out of work, we'd just get a job on that building site with the particular intention of, well, you had to pay your mortgage, you had to go to work to pay the bills, but also in order to assist those workers in there in order to win disputes. And yeah, I mean, lots and lots of stuff like that. And the Jubilee line workers, loads of electricians on the Jubilee line were part of that Joint Sites Committee, and some of the health and safety disputes they won on the Jubilee line I just thought were heroic, to be honest. There was one time, once again, forgive me if I'm just droning on here, just tell me to shut up, but there was one time just in the run up to Christmas when the fire alarms went off when they were building the London Bridge, the new station at London Bridge for the Jubilee line. And this was just a couple of years after the King's Cross fire. And so the place was evacuated, but when the fire brigade got there, when they got down to the bottom levels, there were still hundreds of workers still working there, because the fire alarms down near the lower levels hadn't been connected up properly. And they were so that all of these there could have been this massive fire and they wouldn't have even known that the fire was on because of where they were. So the safety reps who were there at the time called a mass meeting of all the workers and said, come on, we can't be going down and working in this situation. It's clearly unsafe. There's been a fire alarm anyway. This time no one was hurt, but we can't have this going on down in these deep tunnels. So they got everyone and said, look, we'll use our right under the Health and Safety at Work Act that, you know, Section 7 of the Health and Safety at Work Act, you have a duty to look after your own health and safety, and anyone else could be affected by your work. To say, okay, we're not going on strike, but we're not prepared to work where it's unsafe. And so they sacked all the safety reps on the job, and then the workers for the same company all came out and you know, in solidarity action to get them their jobs back, and they sacked over 200 electricians in one day, and they were out for 3 weeks in order to get them workers their jobs back, and all of them safety reps got their jobs back, and all of the workers got their jobs back. And in order to, you know, because they were under really time constraints on the Jubilee lines to got the job back, they even got back paid for the time they were off on strike. So, you know, it's one of these things where, you know, not only can you have, but not only does it demonstrate, if we'd went to court, we would have gone for an employment tribunal. It would have taken 6 months, a year. We might have won, we might not have won. The best we would have won is a little bit of compensation, but the workers lost their job. By workers all sticking together, we get them all their job back, and we do it in a much shorter period of time. You know, but it also does demonstrate the fact that, you know, every employer in the country nowadays talks a good talk about health and safety. Oh, we're all interested in health and safety. Health and safety is their #1 priority. But when workers actually challenge them on health and safety, they can be particularly vindictive, and they can be particularly sort of, victimisation for health and safety reasons is a very true thing that happens, not just in construction, but pretty much every union that I teach now, because I now am a TUC tutor. There's not a training course, whether it's with firefighters or pilots or paramedics or, engineers, it doesn't matter what, teachers who don't talk to me about, we raise concerns about health and safety, we got victimised for it. Sometimes I get sacked, sometimes I don't get promoted. But so yeah. Sorry.
No, brilliant. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was really important. I'm a bit mindful that we could end up with people not becoming safety reps if we think that they're going to get sacked as a result of it. But I think, yeah, it absolutely reminds us that it's solidarity action that keeps us together, and being in a trade union to support each other is the importance of it.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, when I'm teaching a brand new reps introductory course on health and safety, I don't tell them that story. There's a time and a place for telling it, and I'm thinking anyone who's turning up to a hazards event has probably heard, as probably understands that the employer isn't always on our side. If an employer wants to work with trade unions, fantastic. If you've got a good employer who works with us, great, because we all want to have a good employer. But my experience is not every employer is that great, and we should be honest about it.
Yeah, and I suppose that brings me on to the your Organising 101 that you've got in the Hazards magazine. So how did that come about?
Sorry, there's sort of a long version and a short version. I'll try and make the two split between the two. Well, when the blacklisting story first happened, when the story about blacklisting in the construction industry first broke in the media, the first magazine and newspaper anywhere to really run stuff on it was, it was broken in the Guardian, so you can't really say other than the Guardian were the first people to break the story. But after that, the only people who really seemed to be interested in it was hazards. I remember Mick Holder came and, when I first got my blacklist file, before we'd ever really even done a protest or anything, he said, because he knew me, he said, Dave, you got your blacklist file, can I come and take a photograph of you holding it? I said, yeah, of course you can, mate. And, he did a small little chat with me, and it ended up being on the front page of Hazards magazine. And so, this is back in 2009. And then Rory rang me up, because I've known Rory for a while as well. And Rory rang me up and said, can we do a blog for you? So whenever you put out something, we'll put it up as a blog. So irrespective of anything else, from 2009 to 2023, there's been a section on the Hazards website called the Blacklisting blog, which has basically been a chronicle of everything we've done campaigning, in ports and in various other bits and pieces over the time. which we're eternally grateful for Rory for doing. And as the thing progressed, and I got, used to as the campaign on blacklisting went on, I got used to writing press releases for to go out in newspapers, and we got more and more interested from the media. I realised that I could write. I realised that I could string a sentence together. So I asked Rory if I could do a section based on not my own experiences, but really my experiences from talking to other reps. The great thing about being a TUC tutor is after a period of time, you know a lot about a lot of different workplaces. I know stuff about the airline industry. I know stuff about firefighters. I know stuff, about care workers, that I would never have known other than the job I do. And some of the best stories in the Hazards 101 aren't my stories. They're actually stories that have been told to me by, other workers, which I've sort of repackaged and written up and taken all the glory for, if I'm honest. That's how Steinbeck used to do it. Apparently, he used to listen to people on the bus talking and just write down their stuff and pass it off as his own writing as he went through. So I'll be quite open about it. That's sometimes what I've done. So Hazards 101. Organising 101 started. I can't even remember how long ago it started. And there's 22 versions of it, and there's actually more, because sometimes what I wrote for him was too long. So instead of putting it in the 101 bit, he just put it in the so in total, I think there's probably about 30 of them sort of put together. And the idea when we first started is we said we'd turn it into a little pamphlet. So almost like to give it out to people as a sort of tips for union organising and for organising on health and safety. Yeah, that's how it came about. Yeah,
that's brilliant. And we always hand it out to reps on when I go and speak on courses as well. Remind them about it. I think it's fantastic resource for reps. So, what's your favourite 101 that you've done?
It all comes back to this idea that our strength. One of the dangers of being an health and safety rep, and I say this having trained lots of health and safety reps over many years, one of the dangers that we can fall into, I'm not accusing anyone in this room of this, but it's, we might have seen this situation ourselves, is sometimes safety reps get trained up, and then it almost becomes a discussion between the union health and safety rep, who's an health and safety expert, and the manager who's responsible for health and safety. And there's this conversation going on at sort of high level about, what's written in the risk assessment and all have you, is the risk, matrix score correct? Should it be should it be 15 or should it be 18, to get it into the red? And I just think, most of the workers on the workplace don't know anything about what's going on and sometimes couldn't care less, whereas there's not a workplace I've ever been to where when workers are all together in the canteen, they don't complain about health and safety, at least one aspect of it. It's just one of the things workers do when they're all together, moan about their employer, moan about, how terrible things are. If I teach teachers nowadays or lecturers, all they talk about is workload. Excessive workload, not enough staff. If I teach pilots, all they talk about is fatigue and the shift rosters that they're all being forced to work since the flight time limitations were changed a few years ago. Sort of massive sort of fatigue issue in pilots, with literally pilots driving home after doing 5 or 6 sectors and staying away from home for 3 or 4 days, driving home and on their way home falling asleep driving the car and ended up having car crashes. So even so, pilots are people who earn a lot of money. We're not talking about like the poverty end of the of the trade union movement. They've still got health and safety issues, a bit like professional footballers. I work for the PFA and done work with the PFA a few times, and they're talking about where else could you go to work and have 30,000 people racially abusing you as a worker? And yet for some footballers, that's exactly what's happening. And so sure, if there's any other workplace, we'd say, well, what's the responsibility of the employer? So So my favourite, well, sorry, this is long-winded again, but my favourite examples in Hazards 101 is actually one of the first ones I ever wrote. It's just about how you can get workers to stick together, and if we get them to stick together, we can change things. So, because for me, it's all about how we do things as a group. You know, rather than just one person being super rep and who's going to fight all your battles for you and knowing all the laws off by heart is going to make the employer do something. If we can get workers to stick together, we can get them to. So the first thing that I ever did was in. I did this. The first article I ever wrote was talking about flowers. And I think the article is called Flower Power. You know, some of you will have read it, but if you haven't, essentially, one of the reps on one of the courses I was teaching said that one of their members was going to be sacked for having too much time off sick. And they'd gone through the employer's sickness absence procedure, you know, trigger level. We had so many days off, you're on such stage 1, so many days on stage 2, and they were just about to be dismissed. And the union rep had, asked various certain questions and talked about the Equality Act and talked about reasonable adjustments, but the employer was just having none of it. If I remember rightly, the worker themselves were going back. They had the time off sick. We couldn't dispute that, but they were going backwards and forwards to hospital because they'd had a diagnosis of cancer, and they were having tests and all the rest of it. And it was just the complete inhumanity of it. So what the rep did is, just before the last session where the person was going to be disciplined and potentially lost their job, the rep went round and did a collection with all the people that they worked for. Said, "Oh look, you know, this, I can't remember the person's name, but for the purposes of this, let's say their name's, you know, Julie. Oh, Julie's, you you all know about Julie. You all know how sick she's been. She's going to be disciplined and she could potentially lose her job. So we're doing a collection. Do you want to put into the collection? You know, just stick a pound in." And he just went round to her friends and a few other people and got enough money that he could buy a big get well soon card. And he went over to the shop and got a particularly giant size get well soon card, you know, the kind of, you know, the kind of size thing that that my son bought his first girlfriend on Valentine's Day, you know, that big a card, you know, that kind of thing. And the rep buys a massive bunch of flowers and then asks all the people who've put into the collection, "Do you want to sign it? Do you want to sign this thing?" So everyone signed it. They've got a big, massive bunch of flowers. And then the rep says to everyone, the meeting where this woman's going to be disciplined and might lose her job is taking place at 2:30 today in the town hall, literally just down the corridor from where we're all based. We're going to give her the card and we're going to give her a bunch of flowers just before she goes into the hearing. Do you want to come? And so he gets about 20 of the workers there outside the meeting room, and there's a bit of an ante-room before you go in it where they wait until the managers turn up and we're going to discipline this woman. And it's at that point that they give her a bunch of flowers and give her a card, and all of the workers come up and give her a hug and do a little story about how much they hope she's all right and all the rest of it, and delay the meeting by about 10 or 15 minutes by all these people making a big fuss of this poor woman. And then she goes into they all go back to work. And then the union rep and the woman go into the member go into the meeting, and remember the rep in the course has told me this. He's telling it to 15 other people on a training course, and we all went, "What happened?" He said, "We walked into the room, and the manager literally went, 'Okay, we get it. We'll send it back to occupational health. We'll all put it on hold for a while and let her go through. We get what you're trying to do.'" And then it was one. And the reason I love that story so much is because when he went back and told God, I'm going to cry now. When he went back and told the people who had signed the card, you know for a fact that they're going to go home and tell their partner when they're sitting around the kitchen table, you know. And when they tell the story, they won't say, "Oh, the union won this, my colleague, her job, saved their job." They're going to tell you, we won the job back. And I can't tell the story now without welling up. When I tell that story, I get really emotional when actually people stick together and do stuff like that. And that was the first one I ever wrote because I thought, I want to have a thing about how we stick together and how sticking together can make a difference. Because otherwise you can just get there is a power imbalance in the workplace. Every one of us recognises there's a power imbalance between the management and an individual worker. It might have been different in some rose-tinted glasses vision of the past, but I think it's all, we live under capitalism. There is a power imbalance, and I think anywhere where we can stick together and tilt the balance in our favour is a good story to tell. So
I think it's a fantastic example that of people's humanity, of workers' humanity, and how they get it, how they understand it all. I mean, I remember British Aerospace having a dispute, 35-hour-week dispute, and they lost the dispute at the end. They were forced back to work, but the day before they were going back to work, the foreman went round the shop floor and took away the kettles off the shop floor. And to a person, they were not going to go back to work, even if they'd lost the dispute, until those kettles were returned to the shop floor, and they won that, on that basis. And I think those sorts of stories, those sorts of issues are really important for workers. That's the health and safety. That's the basics. It's not just the big campaigns that we get involved with. It's about the reality for workers.
Exactly. I think the thing about a kettle is absolutely right, because sometimes the things that gets people angry and the things that mobilises workers to stick together isn't the big ticket issue. People are concerned about their jobs. People want more money, but actually sometimes people can be really annoyed about the fact that they've taken our car parking away from us. Or we used to have a canteen and now they've done away with all the canteens, and you're not allowed to have pictures of your kids sitting on your desk while you're at work. It's just really petty things that you can really actually get people mobilised and angry about. And I think we only get that if we as reps spend our time talking to the workers rather than spending all our time talking to the management.
Yeah. I was interested in you talking about in one of your 101s. It's about no accident, about occupational diseases, and that the fact that we don't do enough really on occupational diseases. People, we know that 50,000 people plus die each year because of exposures to toxic and hazardous substances. And the importance of us raising those issues with workers and getting them involved in the campaigns, and and interested in your take on that, really, as to how we get more workers aware of the issues.
Yeah, well, this is one I do with a number of unions, actually. The fatality rates for deaths in the work have just been released by the health and safety executive recently. I think it was earlier this week or the end of last week. And construction has gone from 29 deaths to 45 deaths in 1 year. And everyone's like, oh my God, look at this. And it is appalling, absolutely. I mean, it's considerably better than it was, when it was 3 workers a week, but it's still absolutely appalling. There's 51 families who've lost a family member. That's 51 tragedies on an individual basis. But it doesn't touch the sides really about the number of people who die because of work. I mean, there's a whole host of deaths that are just the health and safety executive just completely refused to even class as a death due to work. I mean, suicides. I was talking to. I was training some UCU reps recently, and one of the reps said, we've had 2 members of staff, 2 teaching members of staff commit suicide in the last 3 years. One of them literally left a suicide note on their computer saying the reason they were committing suicide was because of work, and then jumped out the window and killed himself. And the health and safety executive still refuses to consider that health and safety is any, deaths, suicides, work-related suicides are even a thing. They refuse to even talk about it. People, look, some people have lung problems, and I hear employers talk about it as if it's like a oh, well, just as you get older, some people's lungs get worse. Oh, do you smoke and all that kind of stuff? Well, smoking, of course, has got a terrible impact on people's lungs, and we shouldn't sort of, talk about that. We should talk about that. But equally, so is working in dusty environments. If you work with, we've all seen, someone laying curbs, cutting a curb with a sort of, a grinder with dust pouring everywhere. And well, what's the employer doing about it? Because hundreds of people, thousands of people are dying every year because of silica. The health and safety executive refuses to even implement, safe levels for working with silica. It's all sort of advisory. If someone correct me if I'm wrong on that one, but as I understand it, and the stuff on mental health, I find the stuff on mental health that employers doing, I find it appalling, because if it was physical health, we would look at the employers and the trade unions and say, let's do a risk assessment. Let's look at the workplace and see if there's anything in the workplace that is a hazard which may affect your health. So if it was a machine with a big blade on it, we'd identify the machine with a big blade on it. If there's lots of dust, going everywhere, we'd identify the dust. If it was very noisy, we'd identify the noise. And we'd hopefully, the employer in a risk assessment would identify the hazards and say, okay, what control measures are we going to put in place? And whether that's an extractor fan or a guard or pouring water when you're cutting with the blade, or whether it ends up being PPE, you're meant to start at the top. We've all seen this hierarchy of risk, when we've done it on training courses, it's in the management of health and safety at work regs. Can you remove the hazard altogether? Well, sometimes you can. If you're working with lead-based paints gives you cancer. We can get the same colour paint in that hasn't got any lead in it. Change it, yeah, you've removed the hazard altogether. If you can't do that, can you remove the hazard? Well, you can remove the amount of dust in the air by pouring the water on it. It reduces the amount of dust in the air. If you can't reduce it, only then can we protect workers by going for dust masks and sort of ear defenders and hard hats and all the rest of it. And then lastly, maybe train workers, and informing workers of what to look out for. Where does mental health sit on this? The control measures for employers, even the best employers who appear to take it quite seriously, the best that they're doing is having mental health first aiders. The best that they're having is Let's Talk. The best that they're having is a counselling helpline. So you've got to literally get to a point where you're having almost a nervous breakdown, but then you can call the telephone helpline. Or we'll have someone, when you're having a nervous breakdown, we'll have someone trained up in first aid in the mental health first aid who can sort of signpost you to somewhere else. Where's the remove, reduce, protect? You're not saying that we couldn't identify anything ever in the workplace that was a contributory factor to people's poor mental health. What about the bullying management? What about excessive workload? What about lack of staff? What about, targets to hit that are completely unachievable? What about micromanagement by supervisors? What about bullying? What about sexual harassment? All of them things take place in the workplace. All of them things should be taken care of in a risk assessment, and none of the employers are doing that. Even the best of them with Let's Talk and be very sympathetic and we'd support charities and the Samaritans. Okay, no one's against any of that stuff, but try sorting out the lack of staff. Try stopping your managers bullying people, because that would really be an impact on mental health. And I think for me, that's the big issue there, that they talk a good thing and got loads of glossy literature on it, but they're not actually tackling the problems that are causing people to be sick in the first place. Sorry, yes. I get very emotional when I talk about this stuff.
No, it's become a tick box exercise, hasn't it, in terms of mental health? But interestingly, there's been one case, one movement this last week, which will embarrass one of the trade unions, where the HSE have said that an organisational risk assessment is absolutely necessary by employers, and so we can use that, I think, to try and put pressure on employers. And I would just mention the work that Hilda's is doing on suicides. The important work that her and Sarah Waters have done to try and put pressure on the HSC, and Hilda, I know, is down at the moment at an inquest to in one of the suicides from an NEU member. But absolutely, and and your number 21, which is about resistance, about rather than resistance, and rather than the resilience stuff that you talked about, I think is absolutely essential.
There's one. Sorry for people who haven't read it. There's one. There was the theme in health and safety for a long time, especially from corporate health and safety. It was all about well-being, wasn't it? It was all about, let's have fresh fruit in the canteen, and let's do a bit of yoga at lunchtime, and let's have, encourage people to stop smoking or do more exercise and that kind of. Look, no union's against that. Every union's in favour of all of them things. If that's the only thing you do, you're completely missing the point, aren't you? What about the other things that are actually causing the ill health? And the resilience thing I find even worse, because the resilience argument says the way that if you do a heavy lifting job and it's a very manual job, then you can be better at that job by going to the gym and being fit. You're more resilient to the fact that, when you bash yourself, you won't be. And the idea is that you can do the same for mental health, that you can learn breathing exercises, literally breathing exercises, or any of these things that bring your heart rate down, whether it's, particular smells or listening to particular noises. I genuinely did a training course, a joint training course with an employer once, and this was one of the 101 articles that I wrote as well, where the co-tutor of it was the head of health and safety of a big multinational who I will not name, but they're from the retail sector. And they were talking about mental health, and they literally said to everybody in the room, and there was about 40 or 50 people, and all these people worked nights in a warehouse, and their job was newspapers turned up from the big newspaper places. They had to quickly strip them down and put them into smaller bundles and put them onto the back of transit vans that would go out and deliver them to the shops. Okay, that was their job. So they turn up at about 11 o'clock at night and they run through to about 3 o'clock in the morning. And it's very, very quick, thing for doing this. And the teacher, the head of health and safety, did a thing on stress and well-being and said, right, everybody stand up, everybody close your eyes and put your arms in the air like this, and imagine that you're a tree. And played some music that was like wind blowing through a tree and with bird song playing, and left us there like this with our eyes closed, meant to be swaying like this for about 30 or 40 seconds, a really long period of time, where you got this, come on, is it going to stop at some point? And stopped. And and the punchline was, well, hasn't that lowered your stress levels and lowered your heart rate? And whenever you're at work and you find yourself getting stressed, then try this coping mechanism, because it'll make you more resilient. And all of these people who worked in that warehouse just burst into laughter. They just said, "What? I didn't need to say anything." They were just ridiculed this woman. They said, "What are you talking about? If any of us did that at work, one of your supervisors would be up our arse. Bloody get them over, hurry up, get that bloody stuff on about that lorry, now. When none of us would ever get away with doing that. And it's just a sort of, it's not just a tick box exercise nowadays. They show off about it. They boast about the fact that they're doing all this well-being stuff, as if, look at us, how great we are. Stop your supervisors barking at people, get more staff so they wouldn't have to be barked at people to do the same, to make the job a bit easier. That would be lowering people's, stress levels and the rest of it. Sorry.
No, thank you so much. I want to open it up to any questions. Now, if anybody wants to make a contribution, ask a question, then please just raise a hand. You can wave at me or just put an electronic hand up. I was throwing that open to everybody. Everybody keeps quiet now. Oh yeah, here we go, Kevin.
Just a quick one. You're talking about all these 101 articles, and I've read some of them, Dave. Have they been collected in one place yet, where can actually put them in like a booklet, or even if it's in a digital format that people can then download and read?
Well, the digital format exists because all of the 101 articles are all together in a digital format. So it's hazards.org/organising 101. And the reason I know there's 22 of them is it sends you to the last one. Because if you go and look for the first one, you don't realise that there's another 21 afterwards. But if you look at 22, you sort of run down a bit. So yes, you know, there is a digital version of seeing them all, but yeah, the intention always from the very beginning was, you know, between me and Rory, there was that we were going to sort of publish it as a small pamphlet. Really, we've just never got round to it, and as hazards at the moment are in a financial crisis, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. And once again, can we do this plug that everybody gets your union branch to send money to hazards, to you know, get them to affiliate? And if you sit on a national executive committee for your union, you know, literally raise it at your union's national executive committee that hazards need help. You know, hazards bar no one. In fact, I think the whole of the UK health and safety rep movement, you know, safety reps up and down the country saved countless lives during COVID. Yeah, absolutely stepped up to the mark and did stuff that, you know, people would have been forced to go back into unsafe workplaces if it wasn't for safety reps. And even when people did come back, it was much safer than if the employer had just done it on their own. And it was hazards and it was the safety reps up and down the country that were doing that. And, you know, I think the movement owes hazards a debt of honour, really. And should put their hands in their pocket and bloody bail them out. It's a tragedy that the bloody funding stream has come to such a short end, you know, short and horrible finish.
Yeah. The Hazards magazine will survive if the movement supports it, and we need to make sure that the movement supports it. You know, the work that Rory and Joward do is just tremendous, like, you know, and especially Rory internationally, you know, as well in that forum. I think absolutely agree with that. Yeah. So any other contributions? Joe, are you having problems with your sound? I don't know if anybody else is having, I've not heard that anybody else is having any problems.
Joe seems to have been chucked out now. So he's on and off. He's in there saying he keeps getting cut off.
Yeah, he's gone. Doug?
Yeah, where to start with this, Janet? Well, first of all, the first thing I would say is that what we've seen tonight demonstrates why Dave should be the winner of the HSB award, because your enthusiasm and your energy is fantastic, but also your ability to tell stories is great, and stories that mean something to people. I wanted to just commend you on one of your 101 stories, which was the one you did with the USDOR reps, where you talk about mapping the workplace and mapping it for risks. Because the key thing about it wasn't just the idea the rep maps the workplace for risks, they then go and talk to people in the workplace about what they think the problems are. And that's the way, as you'll know, in USDOR particularly in retail, membership's not that great in lots of the organizations I work in, and the way to get members is to go and talk to people. So always getting a rep to go and talk to people is so important. But the question I was going to ask you, I've been around the hazards movement for a long time, and I can remember the days when there were lots of local hazard centres like the Greater Manchester one in other parts of the country, and they were the focus of a lot of the activity around health and safety. Construction Safety Campaign did that as well for a while, but again, it's not quite as it was in the past. Why is it you think that now we're not getting the same number of reps keen to be involved in local active groups that are going to do something about health and safety across the unions, not just within their own union?
I think that's, I mean, partly there's an entire conversation about the demise of trade unionism. You know, demise, that's the wrong word, but, you know, we can't odds and the fact that there was a point in, you know, not so long ago when we had nearly 13 million members of trade unions, and now we're somewhere around, you know, we seem to be jogging around somewhere between 6.5 and 7 million. So there has been a cut in numbers, but I don't think it's because people are hostile to trade unions. Not at all. I just think it's whenever there's polls on any kind of stuff, that even not the trade unions do, but sort of national opinion polls and the media do. Trade unions have come over very positive, or this idea that young people aren't interested. I just think sometimes it's the sector people work in. If you work in a sector where there is an pre-existing trade unions, young people join trade unions. But you're in some sectors where there's been an absolute backlash and victimisation and stamping down on trade unions. It's not surprising that people sort of take a step backwards and don't want to put your head above the parapet kind of stuff, especially as we get more and more sort of casualisation, and it's easier to sack people. It's just a fact. But equally, I also think the London Hazard Centre used to be based, if I remember rightly, in one of the unemployed workers centres or trade union resource centres that lots of Labour councils used to fund up and down the country. We had one in Barking and Dagenham that was called Link. There was one in Hackney, the Trade Union Resource Centre, and it was a way of local authorities funding sort of grassroots campaigns and providing the printing, providing the meeting space, providing the facilities, which I think most Labour councils have just sort of, just rolled back on that and are just not doing it anymore, unfortunately. And that, once again, is a political discussion that our movement needs to have. And I think they were a great resource back in the day. I thought they were a great resource. I remember during the miners' strike, these unemployed worker centres and trade union resource centres were mobilised, and they were the centre of the miner support groups and that kind of stuff. Yeah, so I think, perhaps we need a campaign to bring them things back. It's a long time since people have talked about that, but why not? It's not something that a local authority is going to spend millions and millions on. Of course, some local authorities didn't like it, because if their own workers were on strike, the Trade Union Support Centre would be supporting those workers in dispute as well. So there's that. But I also think there's a culture in some of the unions. Some unions historically have always concentrated on health and safety and always trained their people up in health and safety, and some unions really haven't.
Yeah.
Some unions, they only, it can be a bit anarchy. Like if it's not a culture of it, you might get trained up and you sort of walk around with a clipboard. And if you haven't been taught, health and safety from a sort of organising perspective, as opposed to from there's this piece, have they done their risk assessment? Have they done this? It can be a bit just chasing the employer. Yeah, I think one of the unions that I really notice a difference, in the last few years actually, is the Fire Brigade Union. They've got a new head of health and safety, but even before he was in place, there was almost like a change of sort of psyche within the union that we're going to go down the health and safety route. And it's certainly, I think during COVID, a lot happened where literally loads of people put themselves forward to be safety reps, and lots of them we were teaching on low end. And now that COVID's gone, they still want to come in and get involved in much more campaigning. So as I said, health and safety, I think the firefight, the FBU have really done it. And what you said about retail, I think the retail workers get treated like dirt sometimes by their employer, absolutely like dirt, like the customer is always right, sort of mentality. Even if the workforce are getting abused, sometimes I've had workers there telling me about how someone's been racially abused on a till by a member of the public. And then the member of the public made a big blow-up complaint about it, and the manager came and gave the member of the public a bloody a bunch of flowers to say sorry.
Yeah.
Like, for God's sake, this is your staff that we're talking about. You've got a duty of care to your staff. The customer isn't always right. Some of the stuff they do is very wrong. Sorry,
No, it's fine. You're just proving my point. That's great.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Leslie.
Yeah, Dave, I just want to say about the the culture, as you say, in some of the workplaces, I think within the NHS, or certainly within maternity services. Sorry, I'm the Health and Safety Advisor, National Health and Safety Advisor for the Royal College of Midwives. We've traditionally trained our reps, but then they've gone back into the workplace and not perhaps done very much, as you say. I've always seen them as a great asset that we've underutilised, and unfortunately that was because facility times we've seen in the NHS has been given to stewards who are having to protect workers' jobs through disciplinaries and sickness and capability hearings, and suspensions that have gone through the roof over the last few years. But like you said, during COVID, we saw an increase and a very much need for our reps to step up to the mark and be utilised and support the members, which is where my role came into place, because we didn't have this in our union. It sat within another role. We sort of created this and put a business case together, because I just sort of, as a regional officer sat at home, started to put the courses online for our reps during COVID. And then we put a business case for this role, and this came into play, and we've started to change and increase the training for our reps, because I'm passionate about the reps, and we've seen a good increase now and getting specialist training on board, and that's where our link now is coming with hazards. And I certainly couldn't have done a lot of our training without hazards and what I've learned myself through attending these workshops, I think. And the conference was excellent this year. And I can't remember where I'm going now. I think I was just agreeing with you about why health and safety reps, I think particularly in the NHS, haven't been utilised. And that's my passion, to keep them utilised, and make sure. And the other thing that we've done now is change our, like you say, about the well-being. Health and well-being is lovely. We had a Caring For You campaign back in 2016, which was aimed at our members, trying to let them recognise when they were fatigued and recognise they had to care for themselves. We've relaunched that last year, and this year, rewritten a charter, taking it back to the employers to hold them accountable and to say, you are actually breaking the law when our members do not get the breaks. You're not facilitating the breaks for them, because they just push back and say, we don't manage your time. There isn't anybody to take over from breaks. You know, we've got all this is health and safety. It's a safety issue. And the way we're tackling it now is we've formulated a safety for the impact of staff fatigue on patient safety. And that's one of the things I'm leading on at the moment. We've got some specialist work coming up in specialist training in February, because we're a victim of our own goodwill. And the maternity services, as you've seen in the news, is under so much scrutiny, because it's not just lack of investment, it literally runs on goodwill, and it can't run on that any longer, and it isn't doing. So really well done. I'd love you to come and have a word with some of I know I'm thinking of, right, could do with a bit of this to motivate our staff, to let them see what we can do. And we have traditionally done things sticking together. Altered pay. I was part of the pay campaign back in the 90s when we got a minimum pay for midwives, qualified midwives, and I'm so proud of that. But we can do that in health and safety, and we need to stick together. You're right. I'm sorry, I've gone on one now.
Right.
Fantastic.
One of the things that you said there was about this fact about it running on goodwill.
Yeah.
And then you linked it to the fact that your reps can't get time off to do inspections and go around and talk to people.
Yeah.
And I think there's so many employers who are like guilt tripping their, if you're a teacher, you know, or you work in if you work for Unison as a TA, and oh look, if we give you some time off to do this, think about how the kids are going to be treated. You know, if it's to do with the NHS, it's if we give you this time off, think of the patients. And I said, Yeah, okay. I mean, we wouldn't be doing this job if we weren't interested in the patients. We wouldn't be doing this job if we weren't interested, in the students or the school kids and all the rest of it. You don't need to guilt trip us in it, but they still have got a legal requirement to give our safety reps time off. And I think one of the things that the employers do, and I think you touched on it a little bit there, is that they try and mix the idea of a shop, a steward kind of, rep who's representing people in grievance and disciplinaries, and lump the safety reps in with them when it's to do with facility time. But the law sees them as two separate things.
Yeah.
The law sees trade union duties and trade union activities for a steward, but for a safety rep, it's legal functions. There's a list of all the things that the law says a safety rep should be able to do. The list of the functions, Regulation 4 in the SRSC regs 1977, if I ever quoted to an employer. But equally, the bit underneath, with union reps, it says, like shop stewards, it says you're entitled to reasonable paid time off to do these trade union duties. With safety reps, it says the word reasonable isn't even in there. It says if you're entitled to do an inspection, and you should be given paid time off, as much paid time off as is necessary, that we can do it. And I think sometimes, once again, I don't teach the law because I want people to go to employment tribunals. I teach people the law because I want them to be more confident.
Understand it, yeah, definitely. And that's what we're getting through to our health and safety reps on our training courses, was telling them you have to stand up and go back to work and point that out, because it's our middle managers who don't understand that. We've just run some courses on domestic violence, which is a huge issue, and for our members and the women they care for alike. And one of the management said, "Oh, why are you going health and safety? What's that got to do with domestic violence?" They're very narrow-minded, but we're managing to get out there and speak to them as well, and to see that they're helping them. It gives them support, because if you can support staff who are having domestic violence, lower the stigma of it, ask for help before, reduce the sickness rates, things like that. It's a long job, but it's all very relevant. But yeah, sorry, I'll be quiet now.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Leslie. Can I just say, though, that I was at a Bakers Union conference yesterday, and the number of workers that are not in trade unions is a big issue. Gig and people on casual contracts, and I know one of the 101s is about casual workers. But getting people into trade unions, getting people organised is difficult, isn't it? I know they were talking about hotel workers, that they're standing outside hotels trying to get them in unions, and these workers are being bullied. They're suffering sexual harassment and all sorts of really awful conditions. How do we get to those people, Dave? How do we get organised? Because I know working in the construction sector is bloody hard work, isn't it? On some of the sites, getting people into trade unions. But what's the most effective ways of getting people in?
I think you're right, and I'm a big believer in what we need. People are unlikely just to turn up because we advertise a union meeting. Come to this meeting and expecting people to turn up. In my years I've organised or participated in lots of public meetings where the public gave their apologies. So for me it's more about getting people to come and talk to us about the issue that they're concerned with. On most building sites, when I was involved with stuff, and I've talked to lots and lots of other building workers who are active in trade unions on health and safety issues as well. We all say the same thing. When we first get there, we don't even talk about the union. We don't even mention the union. Number one, because if you did mention it, the employer's going to sack you, because they've got a very vindictive approach to trade unions in construction. But also, we just want to get people talking with each other. And once people are going to talk about stuff, and once you know what the issue is they're talking about, then they'll engage with us much, much, much more. So, and yes, some union workplaces are easier to organise than others. If you work for Ford Motor Company and you're, 5,000 workers all start their shift at the exact same time in the morning and have their lunch at the same time and have their afternoon tea break at the same time, and you're working pretty much with the same sort of 100, 150 people around you, there's turnover, but it's not that much, then actually it's very difficult not to be able to be well organised as a trade union in a workplace like that, which is not surprising that in big manufacturing plants, the unions tend to be well organised. If you're talking about care workers who work for an agency and they go round, their client's house at 7 o'clock in the morning and get someone out of bed and wash them and cook them their breakfast and then dress them and put them in a seat and then go off and do the same thing for another client. And they're literally going from one place to another, day after day. And they start at 7 o'clock in the morning, they might not finish till sort of 7 o'clock at night doing that. They don't meet another care worker. They're literally running around from one bit to another. That's much more difficult to organise. Not only have they got precarious contracts, just the nature of the job means it's very difficult to organise. But unions have done it. I did some stuff with, unions in the. I'm trying to remember. There was I did a report where we went around and interviewed loads of care workers. We were doing this a few years ago. But the way they did it is, although they didn't meet each other, lots of them knew each other. Lots of them just knew each other, because if it's the kind of job that was predominantly a female workforce and everybody used to work for the council sort of 100 years ago, before it all got privatised, and now everyone's, small companies got the package and the companies have just completely outsourced it to agencies. So virtually all of these female workers, precarious female workers, lone workers working on their own, and they're all working for an agency. And Unison on, I'm pretty sure it's Haringey. I'm trying to, if it's not Haringey, it's Hillingdon. And forgive me if I've got the wrong council. But they did it because people just knew each other. They had friends, they had family members doing the same job, and they already had their pre-existing WhatsApp group that they were talking to each other on. And the unions don't need to reinvent the wheel. Once we know who these people are and we're chatting with them, we get them to organise. And a lot of the time we organised outside the workplace. We actually organised in a little cafe in the afternoon, when people had finished work, or sometimes there'd be a downtime, during middle of the day when a lot of these workers weren't doing anything else and were sort of twiddling their thumbs. We'd have meetings there. And the union went from having a few meetings with 6 or 7 people to having a protest outside the town hall with 150 of these care workers. And within about an 18-month period of Unison doing we need a charter for care workers and we want the council to, they all got brought back in-house. They're all now working for the council again. And in fact, even in the most difficult situations, we can win if we get organised. But none of this stuff falls from the sky. It always needs someone to actually start the conversation. It always needs someone to say, come on, we need to do this as a group, we need to do this as a collective. Why don't we have a meeting? Why don't we have a chat? And one of the most uplifting things I've had in the last few weeks of work was I was working with some women who were working for one of the big supermarkets. Once again, I won't name the big supermarket, but they're very big. And in the reps health and safety training course, we were talking about various different health and safety issues, and people were talking about pregnancy. The health and safety issues that come up during pregnancy as well as one of the things. And then we did another activity later on where we talked about, have you ever got workers to stick together as a group to tackle the health and safety issue? This woman who'd raised the issue about pregnancy was because one of the members of staff that she worked with was pregnant, and she was talking about she has to keep going to the toilet more often than she would normally go when she's working on the tills. And so she never, when we first had the first conversation, she only told us about what the issue was. But later on, we said, how'd you get people to work and stick together? And she said, well, what happened is this young woman who was pregnant had kept going to the toilet, and the one of the supervisors pulled her for it and started saying, "Come on, I know you're pregnant, but to be honest, you're going to the toilet all the time, and you're paid to be sitting on the tills serving customers, and I don't think literally almost in front of everybody, so everyone could see her being pulled." And so the safety rep literally went round and chatted with all of the other people sitting on the tills, who she said was, to a person, was an older woman. And they literally all got up and went to the toilet at the same time. And so there was no one on the tills. And like the entire place come to a standstill because like 15 of these women all went to the toilet together and like hung around in there, like twiddling their thumbs, chatting for about 15 minutes before they all walked back in. And they never was that woman ever talked about, a pregnant woman going. You just think that's my kind of union organising. It doesn't even need to be a union member that does that. It just needs to be, but someone, for there to be any kind of mobilisation, someone has to take a lead in it. You don't need to be fully trained. You don't need to be a legal expert. You just need to be able to, be someone who can talk to people and bring people together and say, come on, why don't we do it together as a group? And if anything, that's what I spend my time teaching people on health and safety courses. Yeah, we teach the law. Of course we teach the law. It's part of the job. But we don't teach the law in the way you're going to win is quote this law to a manager, because it's only going to get you so far. What makes the difference is 15 of your colleagues all going to the toilet at the same time. That one's going to be in one of the future 101s, obviously, because it was such a good example. But and it makes you smile, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant example. I mean, actually, toilets probably are one of the biggest issues that workers have, across all different sectors. The access to go to toilets, to getting disciplined for going to the toilet, being sacked for going to the toilet, or being, I think there's a midwife that was dismissed because she couldn't go to the toilet and kept getting infections and ended up off sick and got sacked for sickness. There's a whole host of examples, I think, around toilets.
Yeah, Sarah Friday, when I first got involved in health and safety, one of the train drivers, Sarah Friday, who was one of the few train drivers anywhere in the country who was female at the time, she was a safety rep for her company, and she got sacked for going to the toilet. And it's like, come on. It really is. It's offensive, and actually I train a lot of people who work on the railways nowadays. And train drivers, it is one of the things with train drivers, they're told you can't really do this job unless you've got a really strong bladder, because you're going to be sitting in front of a train. You can't get off the train to go and use the toilet. And there's a lot of the people if people know the London Docklands Light Railway, where they haven't actually got a train driver, but they have someone called a train marshal. He's like on the train, just making sure everything's okay. On the whole of Docklands Light Railway, there's only 3 stations that have got it. Might be slightly more than that, might be a particular line, but there's only a very tiny number of stations that have got an actual toilet. So even if you're doing that job and you're desperate for the loo, you can just stop the train for a couple of minutes, nip out, use the loo and jump again, because there literally aren't any, yeah.
So any last questions for Dave before we close the meeting? Any last comments you want? Oh, John. On in, John.
How you doing, Dave?
Yeah, good, John.
I'm a health and safety rep at Heriot Watt, and I'm relatively new to it. But years and years ago, I used to work down in London in the late 1980s on building sites, and I worked in kitchens as well. And at the time, I do recall we were much more worried about HSE inspections and food safety inspections. There seems to be much less. I love a bit of regulatory authority, but there just seems to be much less preventative inspection now and much more reaction in this health and safety role, which I'm new to. We're kind of reacting to situations rather than anticipating situations, and that employers obviously see health and safety as a cost rather than an investment. That's become very obvious very quick. So I was just wondering if you had any reflections on the decline of the influence on agencies like HSE over the last 30, 40 years.
It's I think the health and safety executive and all of the enforcing authorities have gone through two kinds of sort of thing. Partly there's less proactive inspections, as you said, just because they're a public sector body and they've been cut like everybody else. You know, there are less inspectors around than there used to be. And I remember someone told me, I think there was a statistic on one of the hazards magazines when I first joined, saying that the likelihood of being inspected by any workplace being inspected is about once every 6 or 7 years. Well, that number is up like now 20 years or something nowadays. You know, there's so
200 years, I think.
200 years I've seen that. So clearly, you know, there's that element of it, but there is also the element of it that philosophically the HSE, especially as an enforcing authority, has just been taken over by big business. You know, they literally, when there's new laws coming in, bring in the big major employers and ask them to have an input about what the law should be and what the safe levels should be and all the rest of it. And some of the employers boast about it on their websites, that we've managed to get the safety levels down. This is going to be more profitable for the company, all the rest of it. You know, not specifically the HSE, but the same example is the company that produced the cladding on the outside of Grenfell Tower was a company called Organizing, and they were part of the working party that drew up the safety levels for cladding on the outside of buildings, and literally downgraded the safety levels. And their website boasted, literally, it was like front and centre, we are part of drawing up the regulations, we have downgraded the regulations to make it more profitable. The day after the Grenfell Tower, they took that part off of their website. These people are literally, profit becomes before you know, workers' safety and the public safety. You know, I think it's appalling. And one of my very good friends is actually a health and safety inspector. His name's Simon Hester. He was the head of health and safety in construction in London for about 10 years. And this is another health and safety. This is another 101 article. And he tells me a story which I basically just rehashed into a 101 article. I used to co-teach with him at various different unions when they wanted an health and safety inspector. I said, "Oh, I know one, I'll bring him in and he can do a speech." And he said when they were building Wembley Stadium, it was like a baking hot heat wave that year. And I think it was the first year that ever a temperature of above 40 degrees was ever recorded in Britain, or whatever. It was record breaking anyway in the year. And down on what is now the pitch level, the temperatures were absolutely sky high because there's no breeze coming through, and there's no shade or anything because they hadn't actually built the sort of the roof yet. And also you've got these big concrete things all the way around that are themselves radiating heat when it's really hot. So people are getting like almost passing out down on what is now where the pitch is. And so the workers and the unions asked the employer, can we have more water stations put around the place, and can we have some sort of areas shaded so that if people get overcome by the heat, they can go into the shade and they can drink the water. And the employer said, no, we don't think it. There's no law on it, and it's not reasonable. It's going to cost us quite a lot of money to do that. It's not reasonably practicable. And so Simon Hester tells me that he was called in by the union to come and have a walk around the Wembley Stadium to talk to the management and the unions in there. And the unions was arguing, look, we need all this, it's affecting workers' health. And the management go, there's no maximum temperature in British employment law for health and safety. They can work in any temperature. We're not breaking any laws. We have to provide water. We have provided water back in the canteen. If anyone wants water, you can walk back to the canteen. 20-minute walk. Wembley's a big building site. Sometimes it probably take you more than 20 minutes to get back to the. But we're not breaking any law. The law doesn't say we have to have water points dotted all around the place. There's nothing we've broke. And so Simon Hester is put in this awkward position because Simon Hester, as well as being the head of health and safety for the HSE, was also the chair of their union branch for health and safety inspectors. So he said, right, okay, let me just say this. The employer hasn't broken any law on this, but equally, as he's talking to the, when he's talking to the employee, you haven't broken any law, but equally as he's talking to the union people, he's saying, but of course, every worker in this country has the duty to look after their own health and safety and others around them in Section 7 of the Health and Safety at Work Act, and Section 44 of the Employment Rights Act says that if you refuse to work in a particular area because you think it's unsafe, you can't be victimised for it. So, of course, I wouldn't advocate any kind of unofficial strike, but if a worker decided it was too hot, irrespective of what the temperature, then they could, of course, just refuse to work in that area. And the safety reps, within about 20 minutes, walked around all of the site, and next time it was tea break, everyone went in for tea break and no one came back out again. And what wasn't reasonably practicable when 400 or 500 people were out at work suddenly became very, very cheap when 400 people weren't working, and they're all sitting in the canteen, and and literally within half an hour they'd called up a Builders Merchants, Jewson's or Travis Perkins, and loads of sheds turned up and water coolers that are in the offices. The carpenters were building the sheds and the water coolers were in the sheds. And once again, it demonstrates that, the strength of the reliance on an outside inspector to come in to be the sort of knight in shining armour to save us is unlikely. Even more and more unlikely just because of the cuts, but also that even the inspectors recognise that if workers stick together, you're probably going to have more chance of winning than if it's just relying on one person quoting the law to you. So, sorry for ranting. That one, all the stories take much longer than I think they're going to take. I need to paraphrase them and get them shorter.
No, it was really good. The power of collective action. I mean, I do like regulatory authority, but collective action is where it's at now. So,
if the law is on our side, then we should use it. I'm not against the law, but I just think we can't odds the fact that the thing that I get asked more than any other question is, can my employer do this? Can my employer do that? Well, sometimes you look at the law and the employer's not supposed to do it, but the answer is, can they do it? Have they done it? If they've done it and no one's challenged it, then they've done it. They've got away with it. So, I mean, they can do anything they can get away with, irrespective of whether they're complying with the law or not. So it's having the confidence to challenge it, and the workers getting the confidence to challenge it starts off with the safety reps having the confidence to tell the workers that we can challenge it. That's where I stand on all this anyway. Thank you very much for having me. Sorry for keeping you here so late, but you all wanted to go and have your tea or watch West Ham on the telly.
I'm not sure that's on my agenda tonight. Thank you so much, Dave. It's been wonderful listening to you and sharing all your experiences. Please, if you've got any influence, anyone, vote for Dave for the SHP. We want to have a good worker, health and safety representative elected. I think one of them's an HSC person that's being put up as well. So
it's even better than that. One of the people was an ex-director of Costains, which was one of the companies that blacklisted me.
Oh, great. Let's hope he doesn't get it. So whatever we can do to maximise Dave's election success, please do it. Absolutely support the Hazards magazine. If you've got any influence on the Hazards magazine, get more subscriptions to it, supporting their friends, donations that they've set up. We've put all the links in the chat, please do. And look forward to seeing you all in the next one. But thank you ever so much, David. Thank you for everybody for attending. I know there was a lot more people who'd signed up, and I'm sure they're waiting for the recording. But thank you so much for that.
And thank you all for your support and solidarity over the years. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the trade union movement helping me out on more than one occasion. So, yeah, solidarity is a two-way thing, so thank you all. So.